Hey gamers, welcome to my very first video in this channel, Gudnite Gaming. My name is John, and what's a better way to start things off than Nintendo dropping the Direct that we all been waiting for, which is the Nintendo Switch 2, the successor to their widely popular handheld, the Nintendo Switch. Now, I know some people aren't thrilled or not so happy about how they named the device, but honestly, I think it's a smart way to, keep things simple. I mean, they probably learned their lesson from the Wii U, the whole confusion of the Wii U fiasco. Anyways, this Direct is packed with a lot of things that we're going to be talking about today. A lot of good things, and also there are some I would consider not so good. But yeah, let's go ahead and break down everything what they showed in today's Direct. So the very first one is the screen. The Nintendo Switch 2 has a significantly bigger screen while maintaining the same thickness. For comparison, the Nintendo Switch 2 has 7.9 inches for the screen size compared to 6.2 on the original one and 7 inches on the OLED model. And speaking of the OLED model, unfortunately the Nintendo Switch 2 does not come with an OLED screen or an OLED panel. Now, if you're gonna ask me if I would consider that a deal breaker, personally, I don't think so. I mean, I own an OLED Switch, or used to own an OLED Switch, and the screen for sure looks amazing, but the problem is the inconsistent frame rate. Even though the graphics looks good once you start playing it, and then the frame rates of a lot of games on the Nintendo Switch fluctuates from 20 to 40 and basically not very consistent. It kind of ruins the immersion, it kind of ruins the experience of the game for me. So I'd rather have an LCD screen but with enough power for the device to have a consistent 60 FPS, or I mean even 30 FPS, but around these days 60 FPS should be the standard. Also, the Nintendo Switch 2 resolution by default is now 1080p on its screen compared to the 720 on the OG Switch. And it supports HDR, so overall, it's a quite good improvement. Now, this next one, I'd consider to be one of Nintendo's boldest claim. Apparently, the Switch 2 can go up to 120 FPS. Yes, it's 120 FPS, not 60, even though a lot of people are hoping that the next Switch successor would have a stable 60 FPS, and I guess Nintendo was like, you know what, let's double down and do 120. I'm super curious to see how would that work and whether or not the developers will finally give us some graphical options in game to toggle between higher fidelity versus higher frame rate. Now, if I remember correctly, some Switch games already do have him. For example, the Darksiders one does it, and the racing game that I remember, I think it's called Grid, I think it also has that option. So I want to be optimistic about it, but at the same time I'm a little worried because it kind of reminded me of how Microsoft introduced the Xbox Series S, which is the weaker version of the X, although they're saying that it also has the capability of doing up to 120 FPS, which I think it did to a very few number of games. And then for the rest of the bigger AAA games, the Series S just struggled to, do its thing. And most of the games just ended up having 30 FPS on the Series S. Hopefully the Switch 2 will actually deliver in the future, but for me personally, I'll be content when it comes to the games running at consistent 60 FPS instead of having fluctuation on their frame rates. Now moving on to the Joy-Cons, and Nintendo apparently called the Joy-Cons for the Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Cons 2. So again, a very generic name. But anyways, there are a lot of features and quote-unquote gimmicks that the new Joy-Cons have now. This time, the Joy-Cons now attach magnetically to the device instead of sliding through the side rails of the original Switch. I'd say that's a pretty neat upgrade. Nintendo claimed that these are strong magnets, so when I get my own Nintendo Switch 2, I'll try to do some stress test on that one. And since the device itself is larger, the controllers are now bigger. I mean, especially the SL and SR buttons and the analog sticks. You could see the difference between the sizes of the SL and SR buttons compared to the original Switch. However, for the analog sticks, it's kind of hard to see. So again, I'm gonna be doing a direct comparison side by side to see how much the analog sticks are increased. And of course, we cannot talk about the Joy-Cons without addressing the elephant in the room, and that is the question of whether or not these sticks will still have the dreaded drift issue down the line. I hope not. Although, unfortunately, Nintendo hasn't exactly addressed that, so we'll just have to wait and see. Now, as for the Joy-Cons main features, this is where it gets interesting. So apparently, both of the Joy-Con controllers now support mouse control, and of course, they come with the gyroscope. Also, the right Joy-Con has an additional button, and it's called the Game Chat button, which gives you the ability to finally do a voice chat to other players in your party, and also you'll be able to share your gameplay or your screen to other people. Although based from the presentation, it kind of looks like it's gonna have a reduced frame rate, but I think that's to be expected considering the processing power of the Nintendo Switch 2. The built-in microphone for the Nintendo Switch 2 also has a noise canceling feature, which kind of helps, if you have a noisy background and you still want to do some voice chat with your friends. And other improvements that Nintendo has done for the Switch 2 includes the speakers. Now they have improved sound and has 3D sound features to kind of give you a more immersive experience when you're playing handheld. The device also has now 2 USB-C ports compared to just one. They're located at the bottom, originally for the charging or for mounting into the dock, and there's an additional one on top for charging the Nintendo Switch while you're doing tabletop mode. That is very convenient now, and also to attach any accessories, just like the camera that I mentioned a while ago. Now my question though is that if it's possible to connect an external storage device through the USB-C, and if it does, I think it will open to more awesome possibilities in the future. And then the design of the stand, I'd say generally it's better than the original Switch stand, obviously, but I think I still prefer the OLED Switch stand. It's just, it kind of makes it more stable, and it looks sturdier compared to the one that we're gonna have for the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, as for the internal storage, this time Nintendo did not go thrifty on us. They are giving us a default of 256 gigabyte of internal storage compared to 32 on the OG Switch and a 64 on the OLED. I think it's a very great upgrade when it comes to the internal storage, although I think that may also be the reason for a higher MSRP, obviously aside from other technical improvements. But the storage itself from 32 to 56, that's a huge jump. Although if you compare it to the internal storage size for, let's say, a PS5 or an Xbox Series, I think their lowest is 512, so basically Nintendo's still below that. But then again, the file size for the Nintendo Switch games are significantly smaller compared to the PlayStation and the Xbox. And speaking of storage, it's nice to know that Nintendo Switch 2 will still have a micro SD card slot. Although you cannot use just a regular micro SD card, Nintendo stated that you have to use the express version of an SD card, which is faster but obviously more expensive. But that just kind of makes sense considering that some big AAA games that were released, let's say like a couple of years ago, will be on Nintendo Switch. And yes, I don't think you can run those big AAA games, let's say Elden Ring or Cyberpunk 2077, on a regular SD card. Of course, the dock also gets an upgrade. Now the dock supports up to 4K resolution and HDR on lower resolution. And also the dock now has a fan that kind of keeps your Nintendo Switch to temperature and a safe margin. And Nintendo will also release an updated Pro controller, and I believe there's like a Nintendo 64 inspired controller. Both of those controllers will have the additional game chat button on them. Now, I think those are pretty much the big stuff that we learned on the hardware side. Now let's go to the software and games. So during this presentation, the Direct, Nintendo categorized the games into three types. So the first one would be the Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games, obviously, the games that will only run on Nintendo Switch 2. And then they also introduced a Nintendo Switch 2 edition games, which basically means that some of the Nintendo Switch 1 games will have an upgraded version ready for the Switch 2. And those games will have better frame rates and better graphic fidelity. And since Nintendo Switch 2 is backwards compatible, that means it can run existing Nintendo Switch 1 games. And some of the games that were announced, first and foremost, is the next Mario Kart. Now, they're not calling it Mario Kart 9, they're calling it Mario Kart World. This version of Mario Kart is now open world, meaning that the players can finally do a free roam virtually anywhere on the map. And it will also feature some day and night cycle and weather conditions that could affect your gameplay. I'm definitely excited for this game, and I've been playing Mario Kart as long as I remember, and I think this is gonna be their first top seller in the near future. And another Switch 2 exclusive game would be the game called Drag X Drive, which will be mainly focusing on the Joy-Con 2's mouse feature for its gameplay, and definitely giving some Rocket League vibes. Also, there's gonna be a new Donkey Kong game and a Daemon X Machina game exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. Also, some other big AAA games will be out on Nintendo Switch, like Street Fighter 6, Cyberpunk 2077 on Nintendo Switch. I never would have imagined that that's gonna be the case very soon. And also Elden Ring. Now, Elden Ring, made by FromSoft, actually has another IP. I believe it's called Duskbloods, and it's going to be a Switch 2 exclusive. As for the games that will have an upgraded version for the Nintendo Switch 2, initially most of these games are Nintendo IPs. We have Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Party Jamboree, Kirby Forgotten Lands, and even the upcoming games that were just about to be released on Nintendo Switch 1, like Pokemon ZA and the upcoming Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. They are ready for the Switch 2 upgrade. Now for the release and pricing, here in the US, the Nintendo Switch 2 will be available on June 5 and will cost $450 for just for the console. I chose the Mario Kart bundle for $500 just because when I bought my original Switch, I bought it with the Mario Kart bundle too. And also, I think it's the better price out of the two, considering that Nintendo will be upping their price for their games to $80. Now imagine that. A lot of people are not gonna like that, including me. I'm not gonna be happy about it either. And that's a wrap for this video about the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. If you want to see the whole presentation, they have it on their official website and on their official YouTube channel. So what do you think about the Switch 2 or the whole presentation? Are you excited for it, or are you planning on getting one? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Anyways, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight on my very first video in this channel. I really appreciate it. My name is John. I'm signing off, and have some good night gaming.